Hey everybody, welcome to Drumeo. Today, as usual, we have a really fun lesson. What we're gonna do is we have 10 beats to break you out of your beginner's rut. Now, what I mean by that is basically for people where you're in a beginner stage, but it's starting to get a little easier for you. What we have here is we have 10 beats that are hopefully stuff that you maybe you've never played before, some things you may not have considered. We're gonna apply some rudiments into our beats. We're gonna take bass drums away on beat one, even something odd time at the end. And if we have some time, I may even throw in an additional little halftime shuffle I was messing around with this morning. So let's bust right into it. The first beat that we're gonna do involves flams. So if you look at your notation, number one, we have a pretty basic looking beat, except for on 2 and 4, we're gonna get rid of our hi-hat note. So instead of our hi-hat just playing straight eighth notes like it usually does, like ordinarily when we hear a beat, you'd be playing something like this. Where your right hand is just going in eighth notes throughout the whole thing. This time, when we get to beat 2 and 4, where we had our snare drum, our right hand's gonna come down and play as well. Now, with this, we're gonna make a flam on each of these notes. Now here's the deal. If you guys haven't played flams before, here's how it's gonna work. What you do is you start with one hand low and one hand high. For me, I'm gonna play a right-handed flam, which means that my right hand is gonna be the louder of the two. Now, the trick is just to drop your hands at the same time. You basically want it to sound like a really fat note. You don't want it to sound like, or like, it has to be at least kind of wide. That'd be kind of about as fat as you want to go. So let's even just try that first. Let's not even worry about the bass drum. Let's go 1 and 2 and 3 and flam and. I'm gonna just start playing. I'm gonna throw my overhead cam on, and I want you guys to try and play along. So this is number 1 without the kicks yet. So you'll notice my left hand is just staying low, and my right hand is coming down and hitting really hard for the accent. Yeah, so you can kind of see from the front too. Yeah, perfect. So my left hand's already sitting there in position. So right hand's gonna come down loud, left hand's gonna hit just before it. Now, you can do it the other way too, having your left hand loud, but your right hand's gonna have to come in under it quiet. Notice how I get into position first? That just helps them sound clean. Now, most of you are probably playing with hi-hats on this side of your kit, same kind of thing. I still recommend the right-hand version because your left hand can just basically stay in position, but the left-hand version works just as well. Just have to get your arms out of the way for that. All right, now let's throw in these kicks. So we have a kick on 1 and the and of 1, and then 3 and the and of 3. The only place where we have something a little bit weird is there's a kick, a 16th note after our flam on beat 4. So let's just get up to that kick and stop. So for that, we're gonna have 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E. So it's on the E of 4, right after 4. All right, I'm gonna go nice and slow, and I'm gonna pick the tempo up gradually. I want you guys to try and play along with me. Try and make sure your flams sound nice and fat, and also consistent. You want all of your flams to sound basically the same. You wanna kind of set up a sound for your flam and keep it consistent. You don't want it to be one of them sounds like that, then every once in a while you have one that's more. You want them all to kind of sound the same. All right, let's start nice and slow. Now, this kind of beat can sound really good as sort of a way to build something. Like, let's say you're starting out in like the verse of a tune and you want to pick it up just a little before your chorus. You could start without those flams and then just add them in, and it gives a nice subtle just fattening of your beat. One more thing to consider just before we move on from this one is that you can also split your flam up between different instruments. It doesn't just have to stay on the snare drum. And yeah, I see Aaron L in the chat mentioning that there's 77 people on stage. That's crazy. Usually the numbers on Sundays are nowhere near that high. So super big thank you to everybody that's showing up. This is awesome. Great numbers. I love when everybody's here watching. All right, okay, so yeah, you can throw these flams on. Now what I would suggest is keeping your accented note on the snare drum. So whether you're gonna use a left hand or a right hand for that, doesn't matter. Just means that the note before it is gonna be on a tom, and you're gonna wanna play it a little louder than you would have on the snare drum. On the snare drum, because it's the same instrument, you kind of need them to be really different for them to stand out. Whereas if you're, let's say, on a floor tom and a snare drum, they both can be pretty loud. Sorry, they both can be pretty loud and still sound really good as flams. In fact, it actually sounds a little bit better when the floor tom's a little louder than it was on the snare. All right, okay, so that's gonna wrap it up for flams for now. Let's take a look at this next beat. So for number 2, what we're gonna do is we're gonna make a beat that doesn't have a bass drum on beat 1. So for example, this last one that we just played, and most of the beats you've probably already played, have a kick right on that very first note. The first thing you hit is almost always a bass drum with something. This time, we're gonna take that away. Now, one of the things that's really challenging about this is making sure that you feel beat 1 as that note that doesn't have the kick. If you start feeling beat 1 as the note that has the bass drum on it, be careful of just ending up, you know, mentally in the wrong spot from where the pulse is, because then it's super easy to get lost in the beat. Like if you're playing this with musicians, you could accidentally, you know, mess yourself up and end up totally in the wrong place, and that's super confusing and usually would, you know, kind of train wreck what's going on. So for this example, we're going to use the metronome so you can really hear it. Let me throw this guy on at 80. Perfect. Okay, now, so for this, let's accent the first note on that. So just regular 4/4, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and a 4 and a. Now, so for this, let me play number 2, but as if it had a bass drum on beat 1. So I'm going to put a bass drum with that first note. I know there isn't one, but let's just hear what it sounds like, and then I'm going to start taking it away. 2, 3. So it's difficult to make those feel solid if you're not used to not having that strong pulse on beat 1, because let's face it, right from the beginning, you've probably learned that, you know, your beat starts with a kick on beat 1 and there's almost always a snare drum on beat 2, and that's just how it goes, right? So this can be really challenging. What I want to do now is I'm going to do same kind of thing. We're going to play through this beat, and I'm going to go back and forth from having a bass drum on beat 1 to not having a bass drum on beat 1. It's a great way to really make sure that things feel solid all the way through, because the bass drum on beat 1 version will sound really solid, and the one without is going to be challenging, but you can back and forth them until they feel about the same. Now, just before we jump into that, let me just really talk through exactly where all these bass drums go, because there's 4 of them, and they're all kind of a little bit weird. First one's on that and of 1, so we have 1 E and a. Lines up with your second hi-hat. The second bass drum is right after that first snare drum, kind of like the last bass drum in the last the last example. A little tongue-tied there. So that's on the E of 2. So we have 1 E and a 2 E. And then same kind of thing, we're going to have beat 3 and then the of 3. So these are all spaced out by 3/16 notes. Not super important, but that's how it's working. Every 3/16 notes we've got a kick so far. So from beat 3, we have 3, E, and then right into that last snare drum. So one more time, nice and slow. So we have 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and All right, let's throw the metronome on and go back and forth from having the bass drum on beat 1 to not having the bass drum on beat 1. I'm going to do 4 bars each. So playing bass, like not playing a bass drum on beat 1, I mean, can be a really impactful way to, make a groove a little bit funky and, kind of have an alternate feel to something. Man, I just saw us hit 80. That's great. This is probably the best numbers I think I've ever seen on a Sunday. Anyway, let's move on. Number 3, this is what's called the upbeat feel. Now, I've written this with, pretty much a 4 on the floor kick, which, if you're not familiar, 4 on the floor beat is this. It means that we have 4 quarter notes on the kick drum, 4 on the floor. It's just what that's talking about. So this I've written as we're just playing the and beats on the hi-hats. Now you can do this with any type of beat, but for today we've just written it with this. So your kick and hi-hat are basically going to go back and forth with exception of the and of 4 where there's 1 additional kick drum. So we're going to have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and. So we're going to have 1 kick drum that kind of breaks from that quarter note and is going to line up with that last hi-hat. Let's forget about the snare drum and just try that. So 1. All right, now let's see where the snare drums are going to go with this. So the snare drums are going to line up on beat 2, beat 4, and then we have an additional snare drum on the E of 3. So we have 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. Now, it can be really tricky to place that extra snare drum on the E of 3 there. So let's kind of try it without first, and then we're going to add it back in. So everything but the snare drum on the E of 3. So this is all going to line up with 8th notes. All right, now, if you're still having trouble getting that E of 3, just think about it like this. Sometimes for me, I like to just think about things in patterns and how they even look visually. So for me, right now, I'm playing kick, snare, and then my hat on the right side. So it kind of goes like a little bit of a, I guess a C. For me, kind of goes a bit of a circle there. So kick, snare, hat, kick, snare, hat. So that's another way you can think about it. Just kick, snare, hat, kick, snare, hat. Right foot, left hand, right hand. And if you're on there, it would almost just kind of go diagonally upwards. And I see Aaron L in chat mentioning very disco-ish, kind of R&B, and totally, this is written, I mean, the way I'm playing it is kind of dancey, but the cool thing is this feels equally at home in kind of a heavier context. Let me play it again. I'm going to start it on the hi-hats, but I'm going to move it up to a stack, and then even throwing it on a china, and it's going to sound really big. Especially even playing it slow and playing really loud with kind of crashes and stuff, these can sound really almost metal even. So. All right, before I get way too carried away on that, let's move on to the next one. So that's, again, a really, really fun way to play the upbeat feel, which is basically refers to just playing your right hand on the and beat. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But remember, it doesn't have to stay just with that 4 on the floor stuff. You can totally do it with pretty much any other type of beat. In fact, just case in point, before I move on to number 4, I'm going to play number 1, the one with the flams with the upbeat feel. So before it was. Yeah, so feel free, after you get the hang of these ones, start experimenting with them on different ways that you can play the upbeat feel over anything, really. All right, now, you've probably seen two-handed 16th note beats where you're playing. One thing you may not have experimented with so far, though, is playing 16th notes just with your right hand. So one hand stays up on the hats, and your snare drum will be just played with your left hand, like you were playing an ordinary beat, but your right hand's doing basically double duty, subdivisionally speaking. So we'll have 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. It can be hard to keep these up, so let's try and go pretty slow with these. Let's start up, let's say 70 seems like a good spot. Not even, let's do 60. Okay, so check this out. Let's just get our hands going, 60 BPM, number 4. So again, our snare drum's just going to go on 2 and 4, and we have every single 16th note with our right hand. E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Now, just to make it clear, let me show you how this differs from the type of beats we were just playing. I'm going to keep relating things to number 1 with the flam. So I'm going to play this into that so you can hear how it's different. Anyway, let's start building the beat. Thankfully for you guys, those first couple of kicks are exactly what I just did. They're on beat 1 and the and of 1. So 1, E, and a. Now, the next 3 kicks are going to be our 3 off beats in a row. So the of 2, so 2, E, and then both the E and of 3. I know that sounds confusing, but we're going to have, so 2, E, and 3, E, and 2, E, and 3, E, and So from the top. Now, Now, that last bass drum I just played on the of 4 is important because it's going to be a 16th note away from the beat on, well, from the kick on beat 1. So we have 2 fast bass drums there. Now with these, again, it can be tough to really keep that up with your right hand. So your best bet is to try and hold the sticks as loose as possible and make it, well, take advantage of the bounce. You hit the hi-hats and your stick wants to fly away. The more of that you can utilize, basically you're gonna let the stick bounce and then your fingers, these guys, are just gonna pull it back into the cymbal. All right, now, just before we move on to the bossa nova, it should be noted that I was swinging that just a little bit. Like, I wasn't doing it totally straight. Like, if you put all the 16th notes on your metronome and tried to line them up, it would sound like that. But putting a slight bounce, like making all the E and ah notes a little bit late, I know, this is sort of like tougher stuff, but just if you want to make it feel exactly like I was doing it, it's more of like a, just has just a little bit of a push into each of the sort of dominant notes on the 8th note there. It's a subtle difference. The best thing to do, honestly, is just try and play along. Just put the video on, rewind it back to when I was jamming on that for a while, and just try and make it feel the same. Anyway, moving on. Number 5, the bossa nova. So here's hopefully your first Latin beat. So this is going to be one of the more basic ones. Now there's kind of a few variations to these, but let's just start with right on the first one here. So this is a 2-bar phrase. What we have here is called a 3-2 clave. So that means the clave rhythm, which is going to be this over our quarter note. I'm going to give you a quarter note with my sticks and just play it with my left foot so you can really hear it. Now, all 3-2 means is that 3 notes in the first bar, 2 notes in the second bar. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. That happens in the first bar. To do a 2-3, you'll literally just start from bar 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anyway, so if you hear 3-2 or 2-3 clave and you're wondering, what does that mean? It literally just means you're either starting from the first bar or the second bar of this. Now, your feet are going to do what's called an ostinato. So this is probably another thing that's a little bit new. That just means it's a repeated phrase. So your kick and hi-hat are going to go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So kick, hat, kick, hat, kick. Once you get the hang of that, you've got to line 8th notes up on your ride cymbal. So again, they're not the quick ones like we were doing in the 16th notes. They're just going to be nice, chill, slow. Now, here's the tough part. We got to line up a cross stick. Now, there's a couple ways to do that. The best thing you got to do is literally you just got to find what sounds best on your snare drum. Usually it's something that looks like this. So if you take a look at my overhead cam here, you notice that I've got about 1.5 inches to 2 inches from the butt of the stick, and I'm going right across the drum here. Now, listen to how it sounds with the stick this way. Decent. Now I'm going to flip it over. Let's hear it again. Notice how it was a whole bunch fatter and had a real pleasing click to it? Using the fatter end of the stick makes cross stick sound awesome, and almost no matter where it is. So you can get a bunch of different sounds out of it. Just experiment around until you find what sounds best to you. Okay, here's where those cross sticks are going to go. We're going to have it on beat 1, the and of 2, and then beat 4. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's just try and work out this first bar with our feet. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's going to be on your first and second kicks, and then your second hi-hat. I know it sounds really tough. Let me just play it for you. So we have 2, 3, 4, and 1. And 3. All right, I'm going to start adding in the ride cymbal. We're going to play with this for a few bars, and then I'm going to add in bar 2. So bar 2, it's going to be on beat 2, and then the and of 3. So 1. Nice and slow. All right, now before I get into any kind of weird variations on this one, because there are a couple things I'd like to show you, let's just hear the 2-3 version of it. So that was us starting with the 3 notes in the first bar. This time we're just going to start from bar 2, exact same pattern, just again, halfway through, and it's going to be a 2-3 clave. So 1. That's what our cross stick pattern is going to sound like with the beat this time. I'll start it nice and slow again. All right, now I'm going to show you a quick little variation on this, and then I'm going to take it to some questions. It looks like we have a few that have rolled in with the chat here. So, first up, one of the cool things that we can do with this, especially once you're getting it faster and it might be a little much to keep playing all those right hand notes, you can match your right hand with your feet. So what I mean by that is playing a quarter note and then 2 eighth notes. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. So your kick, hat, and ride cymbal will all do the same thing. Let me just show you what that sounds like. I'll just play with the 3-2 version that's written here. you want to get really experimental, you can kind of go the other way and do 2/8 notes and then a quarter note. This is probably getting into a little more advanced territory, but just for the heck of it, I'm going to show you guys anyway. So we're going to have our 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but we're going to have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and going up here. So. So it can be fun to kind of go back and forth with the different ride variations as well. But anyway, that's just different stuff you can play with if you end up getting really comfortable with number 5 and you want to play around with some different variations. So let's take some questions before we get into the next half of this lesson here. Looks like we have a couple in. First one here from Wally H. He says, how do you count beat number 1? Ah, great question. Sorry I didn't catch that while we were on beat number 1. My bad. But that one, I would suggest counting completely in 16th notes, even though we're only playing one actual 16th note placed note. So what I mean by that is I would say counting 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. I know that's real tough though. That's one of those things where if you want to really focus on your placement and make sure everything's perfect, that's how you want to do it. But if you want a little bit of an easier way to count it, that again, I'd still recommend trying to work on the other way. You can count just the notes that you're playing. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E and. It's a lot more difficult to make sure the placement is perfect that way, but again, work on both. This is how you could do it that way. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E and 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. So that's how you would count that. I would suggest counting with all the 16th notes, but if that's too hard, you can count just including that E of 4 where the extra kick is. Oh, cool. Aaron L. actually had another question, or yeah, related to number 1. He said he wanted me to demonstrate this one, but playing a floor tom instead of that last hi-hat. So on the and of 4, right after that kick we were just talking about. So 4 E and is how that's going to go. So we have. That is a really, really fun way that you can do that. And of course, you can start putting flams on that one too. Sounds especially cool if you do it between 2. So, all right, okay. Warren in the chat asking, the Bossa Nova is new to him. He's wondering if you could recommend a way to start working on this. First thing I'd suggest, dude, is getting that kick and hi-hat pattern going. And actually, exactly as Aaron L. said, I was totally going to say ride cymbal next, cross stick after that. So get this happening. You want to be able to do that thing in your sleep. Now, not necessarily before you start working on this beat right away. I mean, you can just, start getting it until it's remotely comfortable. But this is something you should be working on, like lifelong kind of stuff. Then match your ride cymbal up to it. Once you've got that happening, you can start adding in your cross stick. Now, it may be hard to just throw it into the full thing. So if you want to break that apart on its own, I'd suggest cross stick and ride cymbal first, then cross stick with just your feet. You can even break them up if you want, but get your kick, hat, ride cymbal happening, then coordinate your cross stick between, your feet as well, ride cymbal as well, then you can put the whole thing together. If you want to break it up into all those steps, it'll make it real easy once you put it all together. So, all right, okay. Moving on. So that was their first 5 beats here. This next beat is a fun one. It's called the Kinda Diddle. This is a syncopated pattern for your right hand. Now, what I mean by that is, what I mean by the Kinda Diddle anyway, is it is almost like paradiddles. Paradiddles are a rudiment where we're going right, left, 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 right, left, right, left, right, left, left. So your right hand's going right, right. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 1 and a, 2 E and a. This makes it so that we don't have a left hand double. All the doubles are going to be taken up on the right hand. So we have 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 1 E and a, 2 E and a. So let's even just try that happening first. Let's not bother with our snare drum at all. Let's just get, let's say, the right hand happening with a click so we can hear how this sounds. Just so you can kind of, one of the best ways to keep track of this guy is just with how the right hand works. So it's a funky sounding pattern even on its own. Now, all we're going to do is we're going to fill in all the spaces that our right hand wasn't playing with our left hand. So right, left, right, left, right, left. Now, there's one more little piece of the puzzle for our hands. We have to accent beat 2 and 4, which conveniently just lines up with our left hand if we play this pattern. So 1 E and a, 2 E and a. And then the second half for our hands is going to be the exact same thing. So right, right. Super loud left, right, left. All right, let's start coordinating some kicks here. So we're going to put a bass drum on beat 1, beat 2, the end of 2, and the E of 3. I'm going to start with beat 1 and beat 3 because those two are going to be super easy to add in because they're just going to line up with that big accented right hand at the beginning of the pattern. Then we'll sequentially add in the next two kicks. So it's a super fun and exciting beat to get quick. Now let me just kind of show you one little thing that's cool about it before we move on to the next one. If you want to do an interesting little fill out of this, all you need to do is move your right hand. And it works even if you're playing your hats on this side. Check it out. So if we have 1 E and a, 2 E and a, just take 3 E and a and go down your toms. You probably have 2 rack toms and a floor tom, or honestly, you can take it down any 3 drums you have. You can add a cymbal. Literally, it's just 3 surfaces, but it sounds cool going down toms. So. Even sound cool with your kicks if you want. If you want to get real fancy, you can skip the ones that line up with the kick too. fun stuff that you can do with the kinda diddle. Anyway, speaking of paradiddles, let's take a look at example number 7. In example 7, we have a linear beat that's based on a paradiddle. Now, what I mean by that is those paradiddles we were talking about, the right, left, right, left, left. First half of this is basically that. In fact, if you put a crash cymbal with that bass drum, it's exactly what you're going to be playing. Because you'd have right, left, left. Except being linear, we've made it so nothing lines up at the same time. So that's basically what linear means, is beats that work when they're more kind of a flowing manner rather than the strict sort of gridded everything up against the eighth notes on the hi-hat. So this minus that right hand of beat 1 is just going to mean we have kick, left, left, kick, left, left. In fact, that even on its own sounds super cool as a beat. We have a second half to it. This is pretty cool though. I like the second half here. If we have a syncopated snare drum here, we're not going to have that beat 4 snare drum accent this time. So what we're going to have is kick, right, left. So an accented snare on the E, sorry, the of 3, E and and then right, left. Technically that's an inverted paradiddle where we're starting with the double. So right, left, the backwards of right, left. Anyway, so let's hear what just the second half sounds like. Let's go nice and slow and put these two together. So remember, we have kind of a paradiddle again with kick instead of that right hand on beat 1, and then the pattern we just learned. Now, before we start to get to speed this one up, I'm going to check into the questions because there were definitely some that were, specifically to one. Okay. One sec, yeah. Okay, just backing up one little quick second to number 6, and this also works for this one. Smitty Dog was asking, with number 5, would you count them in 16th notes? Yes, and same thing with the one that we're working on right now. Number 5 and number 6, count them as 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and all the way through it. Then, okay, JRN was asking, what was that Sabian cymbal you hit last, the one you are playing with your right hand? I would imagine you meant either this guy or these guys. These guys are AA sick hats. They're 18-inch. This is a stack with a 19-inch manta ray, 20-inch AAX ISO crash. And then, yeah, it was probably one of those two. If it wasn't, reply again with kind of what it looks like. And then, off topic, he says, do you think Sabian Encore hats, sorry, this is from Jorgen Peterson. Do you think Sabian Encore hats are too soft and quiet for metal? Honestly, the Encore hats that I have, because I have a set of those, I have the really old school ones that are kind of dark and look a little bit like these guys, but they're really, really thick and chunky. I say that like the open wash sound doesn't work for metal for me. I don't think it really fits, personally. But I wouldn't say it's because they were too light. I would say actually quite the contrary. It's because they're too heavy and kind of clunky. They, yeah, they didn't seem to work for that kind of thing. They have a super, super dry kind of bark to them. It's, yeah, I don't think it's quite the right choice. Anyway, all right, back to number 7 here. Okay, so let's get this guy happening. We're going to pick the tempo up a little bit. One of the cool things about linear beats is once you really get the hang of them, you can completely shred them. They're kind of meant to be able to be played really quickly. All right, okay. Next up, we have a 16th note shuffle. So this is kind of it feels like a halftime shuffle, but we're still putting it in time. So that just means that we're gonna have a double shuffled hat. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this would be like we're taking 16th note triplets. And just skip in the middle of each triplet. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Let's just get used to that with our hands. So we're going to put a snare drum on beat 2 and a snare drum on beat 4, and we're going to have that go for the hats. Now, you probably noticed there's an extra hi-hat in the notation right at the end here. And just to recap, we're on example number 8. We're going to skip that for now. So we're just going to keep playing that shuffle pattern on the hats. Now, before we start putting kicks in there, let's see what's going on with that extra hi-hat at the end. Now, what that's going to be is we're just going to throw that middle note of the triplet in on the last one. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and triplet. So that's how that's going to go. Now, you're probably playing your hats over here. You could totally just sneak your left in underneath, or you can pull it completely around. That's literally, you just kind of, it's like your hand kind of just turns over and flicks your left hand at the hats. And your hats are probably a lot closer than this. Like these are set up to be played open-handed rather than cross-handed like this, which is why I have to reach so much for them. So you can either go under like this or totally around it. And of course, if you have multiple hats or just want to use a different sound, you can break them up. All right, let's start placing these kicks. So for beat 1, we have the first and the last note. So the next one is going to go on the and. So it's on right after that first snare drum, the next sort of heavy right hand note on the hi-hats. Now, the next 2 are going to go on the first of each of these double groups of hi-hats, right before the next snare drum. So on beat 3, we have 3 and 4, 3 and 4. Now, let's put this whole thing together nice and slow. Okay, cool. So we have our 16th note shuffle, well, our 16th note triplet shuffle here. Now, I don't want to spend too much more time on that. We're already pretty much coming up to the end of our hour. And don't worry, I'm totally going to go a little bit long and make sure that we get all this stuff in, including that extra beat I was talking about earlier. Let's move on to number 9. This one's all about just showing you guys some new stuff. So this I call it the Carter Beauford, not necessarily because it's something he specifically played, but this was just inspired by how I know he plays. Specifically, I had the tune number 41 in my head when I was writing this one up for you guys. So what this is a ride cymbal beat, but with some 32nd note hi-hat notes. Now, there's a couple ways we're going to play these, just a little bit of a challenger at the end of it, but what we basically have is the first half of the beat is just 1 E and a 2 E and a with our kick on 1, the of 1, and then the and of 2. This is a really, really common beat here, just the first half of this. So that there is a beat that you guys should definitely have super internalized. Anyway, after we get through that, so we have 1 E and a 2 E and a, and then we're going to have 3 E and a, 4 E and a. But that 3 E and are actually going to be 32nd notes, so we're going to have 3 E and. And then so what we have is 3 E and with 32nd notes into an 8th note open hi-hat. Now it's going to close once we get to that note on beat 4, which is going to be a floor tom with a ride cymbal. So we're using a floor tom instead of that second snare drum. So make sure that your hi-hat closes right with that floor tom and ride cymbal. You don't want it to be or it's got to be right at the same time. So it's a good idea to get that internalized just exactly that way. So sit there, play just that beat, just that part of that beat, and internalize it that way. Once you have a hang of it, then let's start to put the two together here. So now we have. You may have trouble kind of lining those 32nd notes up. Check this out. If I take my left hand away, it may be easier for you to line up because that's just going to be 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 and a. And once you get that happening, then you can add just the offbeats. Now, if you want an extra challenge, you can totally do these as doubles. Which actually lends itself to some cool some cool options if you split them up too. Check this out. See, like it just doesn't quite work as well if you split them up with singles. But doubles sound pretty cool. So up to you on how you want to play through with that one. I would suggest trying to work on both. Anyway, let's put this together and work our tempo up a little bit. Carter Beauford. Now, that's definitely a more challenging beat than some of the other ones that we were playing there. Before I get on with that, Wally H was asking about number 7. He says, are you hitting the hat with the bass and snare drum on the first 2 beats of the music? Let me just check this out. Yeah, absolutely. The hat, all the hi-hat notes in number 7. Oh, wait, whoops. No, I was totally looking at the wrong one here. No, none of the notes line up at the same time in number 7. With number 7, everything is individual. Check this out. All of it is just on its own. There's no notes that line up with anything in this one. Now, you can do that. You can add them in as variations, but to keep it linear, you want to have them all separate. All right, okay. Now, we have another one in here before we move on here. Smitty Dog is asking, how are the 30-second notes counted out? Honestly, for those, like, it gets so quick just with like that tiny division, you don't really count them all. Count the 16th note. So we have like 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. You got to make sure it lines up with that. So 3 E, 3 E and 3 E and 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a good way to practice that is just practice counting your 16th notes into 30-second notes. You can even just keep your right hand playing solid 16th notes for the whole thing and just add in 30-second note offbeats with your left hand. I'm doing this just on my leg so it doesn't duck my audio out, but we have 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. Now you probably noticed I breathed instead of saying a couple of numbers in there. That's the best thing you can do. You want to make it so when you're counting, it doesn't matter if you have to breathe. You can just breathe instead of saying something. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a. I didn't add any time. I just breathed instead of saying 1 E and a there. It's tempo dependent and, placement dependent for, when you have to breathe, which numbers you're going to skip, but just get used to trying to keep it working like that, and that would be the best way to work on counting your 30-second notes, I think. And then from Brammy at AOL, he says, which foot do you use for the hi-hat on the right side? My left foot is for both of these sets of hi-hats, and my right foot is for this one. I know, I've got kind of a weird setup here. Most of you probably are set up with ordinary. Left foot takes the hi-hats on this side. So when I'm playing like this, it's the exact same as you guys playing like this, just my hands are open for it. So it's just how I've got this kit set up. Awesome. I also saw Geffen in the chat asking about Skype lessons. Yep, I totally do Skype lessons. Just hit me up with a message here or hit me on Facebook, and we can totally line that up. Anyway, the last beat. I'm super excited about this one. For any of you who are familiar with some of my other lessons, I like weird stuff, so this is where I'm going to teach you, hopefully, your first odd time beat. So what we have here is 7/8 time. Everything that we've played in this lesson so far has been in 4/4, which means we have 4 quarter notes per bar. What that means is we have 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if I was to take away half of one of those notes, so 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then skip that and a 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 4, 1. It just means we have 7/8 notes per bar. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 3 and 3 and 4. I think my counting got a little mixed up when I was doing the stupid hand thing. But anyway, 7/8 notes per bar. So I haven't done anything mean sticking-wise. Your right hand's literally just going to play your 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And I would suggest counting it this way, but you can also just count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The only thing is bad about, well, bad's not the right word. The only thing that's different about that is when you get to your 16th notes, and there's a couple of them, it just means that you're going to have to say them as ands, and that kind of gets confusing for just depending on where the actual placement is. Anyway, let's put this beat together. So right off the hop, we have 1 E and a 2 E and 1 E and a 2 E and a. And then here's where it gets a little bit tricky. For 3, we have 3 E and a 4 E, and then it's back to beat 1. So kick, snare, beat 1. All right, so with that, what I was doing there, I was crashing on beat 1. That's a really good way to learn how to feel these beats. Now, if you've never played 7/8 before, that probably feels really weird to do. So having a big long accent on the first note of each bar, is gonna really help you feel that beat 1 is where it belongs. Now, good practice, first up, you want to make sure just doing it with your metronome. If you have a metronome that can play 7/8 time, that's going to be helpful. I'm using visual metronome here, and it doesn't do eighth meters, but if you make it 7/4 and double your tempo, it's the same thing. Check this out. So let's do 4, 5, 6, 7. Once you have it pretty much down and internalized, try and play it back and forth with 4/4. So I'm going to play something similar in 4/4, so basically just one more eighth note per bar for 4 bars, and then 4 bars of this back and forth. I'm going to do it a little quicker just so I'm not taking forever demonstrating this, but this is a good way to practice as well. I'll start with the 7/8. So I'm going to check out some questions here. It looks like we have a couple more that have rolled in, and then I'm going to show you that bonus beat I was telling you about here. Okay, Richard James asking, do I use heel up or heel down for the hi-hats? I actually use both, depending on my application. Most of the things that I was doing here today, I was using heel up for. Sorry, I actually don't have a pedal cam set up today. But it, yeah, for the most part, I was using my leg for. Now, I do drop my heel a lot and use just my ankle for some of it sometimes, but it depends on what I'm doing. A really good example of that is actually a beat that I was playing last night with my funk band. Oh, what tune was that again? Peg by Steely Dan. The beat, now this probably isn't exactly the beat that's on the record, but what it's kind of evolved into from us playing is So as you can hear, the hi-hat has two very distinct, different open sounds. I'll do it with my left hand on my leg. So for that, I'm using leg for the quieter notes. I'm just bumping my leg up. It's almost like my leg is kind of playing quarter notes, and I'm just letting it lift up for those opens. But for the big open, when I'm hitting it like that, I actually drop my heel down. So I can give it a real nice big fat open. All right, so yeah, it depends on your application. That's definitely a way more advanced beat. Like that's definitely on the super advanced side of stuff, just to really get that all the nuance out of that. But both are very useful. Love heel up, love heel down with that. All right, okay, so Oh, we have another question here from Geffen. Oh, this is a great one here. Okay, he's asking, how do you count when you start mixing up time durations? And what he's meaning by that is the subdivision. So he's talking about when you go from something binary to tertiary. Now, so he's talking about something is where you count it as twos or fours, kind of like the 16th note, 32nd note thing we were talking about, versus something that's more triplet based. For that, honestly, you just have to get really comfortable enough with each that you can count within those subdivisions and switch back and forth. That or find a subdivision that works out between both of them. For example, if you were doing like 8th notes and 16th triplets, you can just count 16th note triplets and they'll all work within that. Now, if you were doing 16th notes and 16th note triplets, it would have to be like jumped up to, what would it be, 32nd note triplets for everything to line up for that, which would be insane. But so for those kind of things, you'd want to make sure that you can count back and forth from the different subdivisions. And that would be a matter of just literally practicing counting. Like throw your metronome on, give yourself just a quarter note and go from like, let's say 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 4 E and a 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. So you can do that kind of stuff. Back and forth makes probably the best sense because counting any more than that is just way more of a tongue twister than it's worth. Because like, yeah, you could put in the work with that, but you can get the exact same results doing it this way, and it's gonna feel a lot more natural. When you start dividing stuff up into like crazy math like that, unless it's the absolute only way to figure it out, I would suggest taking the route that would be a little bit more natural because let's face it, when we sit down and we start playing behind the kit, we're not sitting there and thinking crazy calculus in our heads. We're sitting there and trying to make things feel good, right? I mean, that's sort of our job behind the drum set is to make time feel good. So yeah, I would suggest trying to just really get comfortable with switching your counting with the metronome. I mean, then you're gonna be more fluid with playing them anyway. So yeah, that's how I would suggest to work on that, dude. Looks like we have another one here for Smitty Dog asking, do I have a trigger for your hi-hat? There aren't triggers in the sense that I'm just taking that at its very literal standpoint, but I assume you actually mean, am I playing it with my foot? Yeah, all three of the hi-hats on this kit are pedal operated. I have my left hats here with my right foot, and then both my right side hats are with my left foot. Yeah, it's a mess of pedals back here. I actually just hooked up my fourth kick. It's not mic'd right now, but check this out. This is like serious pedal nightmare over here. I have so jam block left foot. I have left auxiliary bass drum, main hi-hat, left main kick, auxiliary right hi-hat, right main kick, left hi-hat, right aux bass drum. So I know it seems crazy, but basically 4 kicks, 3 hats, and they're each split apart. So there's like kick, hat, kick, hat, kick, hat, kick. So it's like you're always going to go back and forth between one or the other on here, and then there's the jam block on the left. I usually just use for demonstrating time, actually mostly in these Drumeo lessons. So yeah, awesome. Okay, I want to show you guys one more beat. I know we're like completely out of time, like 15 minutes over at this point, but I don't think anybody minds. I mean, you're all still here, right? I wanted to show you guys one more like halftime shuffle beat. So we had the 16th note triplet shuffle that was in number 8 here. Last one that I want to show you is going to be the same kind of idea, but we're going to do 8th note triplets. So this time it's going to be 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. And what we're going to do is we're going to have kick and quarter notes, and we're going to have our right hand go 1 triplet. So all the notes in between. So kick, right, right, kick, right, right, kick, right, right, kick, right, right. But we're going to try and accent that second note. And then the only thing we're really going to add to that is a snare drum on beat 3. That was the last little one I wanted to show you. Just a fun little thing that I heard in it was a Nerve song I was listening to earlier. So Jojo Mayer was playing that. Some cool like open hi-hat variations and that stuff too. If you haven't checked out Nerve, I strongly suggest you do so. So yeah, I guess that'll wrap it up for today. I noticed Aaron L in the chat, always on top of the links, man. Super appreciate it. I pulled up a picture of my pedal rig with the extra Demon drive in there. It's yeah, I can't wait to get some triggers on those guys. I'm definitely gonna mic them. It's gonna be acoustic drum sound, but I'm also gonna have triggers with just some weird sounds. I'm thinking really weird industrial kind of stuff I'm gonna add to those. And then you'll see. I've got some ideas for some really interesting weird stuff coming up. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming out and hanging out with me today. All like 80 something of you, ridiculous numbers, very cool. So hopefully these beats will inspire some new creativity for you guys. And until next time, you guys can catch up with me right here in Drumeo in the members area. You can, oh man. Aaron L. I totally forgot all about that TD25 kit, and I'm 100% out of town next week mixing the new Third Ion record. So I know I said this last month, but at the end of this month, I'll get that done. I'm so sorry I forgot about that. I totally know what I want to do. I just haven't gotten around to programming yet. I basically want to recreate my new 17s and make like a really dark sort of set that I haven't quite done yet. And not quite as weird as Professor Fatty though, but anyway, that'll happen. I cut myself off there. So you can catch me here in Drumeo, right on the members area. You can catch me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, all those sites.com/AaronEdgarDrum. My site, AaronEdgarDrum.com, and then of course my band, Third Ion. And yeah, the new album that I'm mixing with those guys next week is insane. So I can't wait until you guys can all hear it. We've also got an Indiegogo if you want to pre-order it. So yeah, see you guys later.